Good evening, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us for the debate tonight. It will be hosted by the UF Speech and Debate. We are a student government funded organization with several debate squads and a competitive speech team. Our public debate team will be on the display tonight. This squad allows students the chance to hone their public speaking skills, writing, and argumentation skills. And our resolution tonight is if the scientific community improves the way it communicates with the general public, there will be significantly less scientific skepticism in the United States. The structure of the public debate is you have the affirmation, which is the team that argues in support of the resolution, and the negation, which is the team that negates the resolution. The types of speeches are the introduction / constructive speeches, and these are the speeches that lay out all of the points for the team's position. Next, you have crossfire, which is a 3-minute period after each constructive in which opponents ask questions about that team's arguments. And then finally, you end with the rebuttal speeches, which are the ones that critique the opposing team's arguments. We have a few definitions to clarify for tonight's debate. The first one is scientific community is practitioners and teachers who work in the basic and applied sciences, including but not limited to medical professionals, data analysts, and lab and field researchers. Next, you have communication. This is defined as the imparting or exchanging of information or news. And lastly, you have skepticism, which is doubt as to the truth of something. And in this instance, we address doubt of data from the scientific community. Just a few reminders for the audience. This debate will be recorded, so please keep your cameras off and microphones muted. Please do not message any of the debaters during the debate. There will be an audience poll at the end, and we encourage guests who are not judging or debating to stick around and vote. The debaters may be arguing points that they do not believe in, so what you see tonight is a demonstration of analytical writing and performance skills rather than reflection of their personal beliefs. Once the debaters finish speaking, judges will have 5 minutes to private message their decisions to me. Excuse me. After the outcome is announced, I will ask you to elaborate on your decisions. For those who are here for class credit, I will be sending out a link to a Google form to take attendance at the end of the debate. And tonight on affirmation, we have Anina Zaremba and Ben Scarpino. And on the negation, we have Holly Smith and Sophia Rapazzo. All right, take it away, guys.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nina Zaremba, and tonight, alongside my exceptional partner, Ben, I will argue an affirmation of the resolution that if the scientific community improves the way it communicates with the general public, there will be significantly less scientific skepticism in the United States. Tonight, I will explain to you and prove our 3 main points. 1, improving communication will reduce skepticism because the lack of accessibility to scientific information is one of the primary causes of distrust of the scientific community. 2, despite what some believe, the general public actually desires education, so improving communication will improve the knowledge of those reached. And 3, the politicization of science currently acts as a strong deterrent and barrier to the communication of objective science, and once removed, the degree of intellectualism amongst Americans will increase and the dangerous skepticism and distrust of the scientific community will decrease. So back to our first point. If the scientific community improves the way it communicates with the general public, there will be significantly less scientific skepticism in the US because lack of accessibility to scientific information is currently the main barrier to this distrust. This means that this issue isn't that Americans are naturally unintelligent, but rather they are not given a pathway out of ignorance because of their lack of accessibility. Improving communication would mean improving the access that all Americans have to education, which would naturally decrease the unhealthy skepticism of science we see these days. Instead of being taught about how vaccines work or the intricacies of climate change, we learn about mitosis and the periodic table the same way every single year until college. Of course, this information is important too, but the content of our education needs to be diversified and updated in order to include the sort of science we interact with in our daily lives. And this need in education, or this need to change the education system in America, goes beyond just content. The Foundation for Economic Education's Schools Are Outdated, It's Time for Reform article, and the Students for Social Change, U.S. Education and Outdated System article both highlight how the structure and methods of teaching in public schools is horrifically outdated. Standardization is valued over individuality, high test scores and A's over learning. How can we expect people to be educated and trust in the scientific community when they are brought up and educated in an outdated and ineffective system? In addition to general lack of access to updated and relevant scientific information, there's lack of access for certain marginalized communities. eWeek.org's article, Many of America's Schools Aren't Fully Accessible for Students with Disabilities, highlights how the majority of public school districts across the United States have physical barriers to disabled students in their schools. And most notably, the shocking amount of poverty in America strongly contributes to the ineffective and groundless skepticism we see. Pediatric Child Health Study, The Impact of Poverty on Educational Outcomes for Children, highlights how well documented it is that, quote, poverty decreases a child's readiness for school through aspects of health, home life, schooling, and neighborhoods, end quote. Unless a child has everything going for them, school will be exponentially harder. And how can we expect a child to prioritize chemistry and physics when they are struggling to meet their basic needs? If the scientific community does its role to increase the accessibility of the information they disseminate and make it more available to all Americans, only then will America have the tools to trust and be open to the information presented to them and be less skeptical of science. While it may be easy to write off the anti-intellectualism we see as a choice or as the natural stubbornness of many Americans, we have already talked about how that is not true. It is really about lack of accessibility, whether that is a flawed education system, schools' inability to accommodate students, or students' circumstances that inhibit their ability to focus in school. And this brings me to our second point. Americans desire education. Once accessibility is improved and people can have proper access to the information necessary to properly understand scientific phenomena, there's plenty of evidence to prove that Americans will willfully and excitingly take in this information. There's little doubt that most Americans believe in the benefits of education and sending their kids to school. The US Census Bureau reported in 2017 that the number of students nationwide enrolled in school was 76.4 million, and that those who enrolled made up 24.7% of the population. Forbes' article, New Survey, Americans Want More Higher Ed Accountability, shows how 76% of Americans believe that education after high school will be beneficial and positively impact one's life. The average American reads 16 books a year, according to Charlie Ambler's 8 Ways to Combat Anti-Intellectualism. According to the Pew Research Center's audio and podcasting fact sheet, as of 2021, 41% of Americans ages 12 or older have listened to a podcast in the past month, up from 37% in 2020 and just 9% in 2008. The CBS News article, The Golden Age of Documentary Filmmaking, shows how documentary making and consumption have been on a steep rise, largely thanks to the fact that they have become more accessible via various streaming platforms that now host these films. The American Alliance of Museum Facts and Data, describes how, quote, 66% of all US leisure travelers participate in cultural or heritage activities, such as visiting museums. More people visited an art museum, science center, historic house, or site, zoo, or aquarium in 2018 than attended a professional sporting event. And children who visited a museum during kindergarten had higher achievement scores in reading, math, and science in 3rd grade than children who did not, end quote. And importantly, quote, 97% of Americans believe that museums are educational assets for their communities, end quote. Needless to say, the consumption of educational media is high and strong. People want to learn. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing these impressive numbers in educational media consumption. This proves that once better communication is established between the scientific community and the general public, meaning they help improve the accessibility of information and education to relevant topics, then that information will be accepted on a wider scale than it is now. That way, it will no longer be such a foreign concept and will be seen as another point of curiosity and further learning rather than a strategy on someone's political agenda. Which brings me to our last point that the affirmation wants to prove tonight. If the scientific community improves its communication with the general public by depoliticizing science, there will be significantly less scientific skepticism in the US. Right now, a major issue with disseminating scientific information is that rather than it being communicated as an objective fact and data that stands in its own right, science is seen through the lens of the motivations of politicians, taking away the very essence and reliability that comes with using the scientific method. Scientists are not politicians, and politicians are not scientists. We cannot expect one expert to also be an expert in a completely different field. What is also concerning is that too many Americans rely on politicians as sources for scientific information. The only people that should be telling us about science are the scientists themselves. Hearing from the primary source is objectively more reliable and trustworthy, and if the primary sources of science, who are the scientists, were given a greater platform, there would be a decrease in the distrust and questionability of the information. Why would anyone but scientists tell us about science? Would you expect your tax attorney to be the same person who fixes your toilet? We all specialize in what we're good at for a reason, and that is why the people who are experts in their fields are the ones who should be talking about it. Politicians have ulterior motives and alternative agendas. That is no secret. So when it comes to objective information that all Americans are entitled to, it should not be coming from the mouths of people who will say whatever they can to get you to fill in the bubble next to their name on the ballot. Once we let scientists speak for science, Americans will be better able to trust the community since they know it is not washed over with political motivations. The same way religion has been used for centuries as a tool to influence and control people, the same thing is happening with science. And the sooner that train is stopped and the sooner the scientific community improves its communication with America and becomes a primary source for information, the better for intellectualism and decreased skepticism in America. Baseless, irrational, and dangerous skepticism of America's scientific community has led to a rise of anti-intellectualism and distrust in America's scientific experts. But it is pivotal to remember that America is not fundamentally anti-intellectual. We are a nation that values and desires to learn more. The issue is that not everyone has the same resources and access to updated and relevant information, and the current educational infrastructure is not adequately equipped to teach our students as best as it can. Lack of accessibility and the politicization of scientific information is a detriment to intellectualism in America. And once the scientific community steps in to decrease disparities and serve as the primary voice and point of contact for communicating scientific information, then distrust and scientific skepticism in the United States will decrease. Thank you for your time, and please get vaccinated.